Good morning, everybody else. Thank you so much for being here today. I really don't feel like I need to say a whole lot. We had so much inspiration through the music and the songs and testimonies. But I have a message prepared, so I'll share it relatively shortly. Last week, Pastor Mike shared about taking God's standpoint or seeing from God's viewpoint, putting on God glasses when we sometimes get overtaken by negative feelings, or we can't see ourselves or others the way that God would see them. And I just thought that would be a really great thing to continue on. Actually, I feel like we could really do a whole sermon series on this topic, and so maybe that's something we should consider, but I'll just take it a little bit further today. First of all, has anybody ever felt envious before? Nobody? Okay. You ever feel like somebody has it better than you and you kind of wish you could sabotage them because you're so envious? Or how about feeling really sorry for yourself? Anybody felt really sorry for yourself before? Like, gosh, everybody has it better than me. Okay, now we're getting some participation here. Okay. How about anybody ever felt judgmental towards somebody else before? Okay. Anybody relate to like a superiority complex? You're just feeling like, gosh, I could do it better. They don't know what they're doing. Yeah. Yeah, there's all sorts of emotions, but I find that with any of these types of emotions, when I start to feel them, it's almost all-consuming. Don't you feel like that when you start to think this way about somebody or feel this way about a certain situation, it's kind of like all you can think about and all you can feel? Whatever the emotion is, for all of these feelings, it feels like it's all about me, right? About how I experience something or how this situation is affecting me. And what I want to bring up today is that when we take God's perspective on a person or a situation or myself, even on myself, it's actually not about me. I did a whole bunch of arrows and like zigzags and crossing out on my message, so I have to make sure I go to the right place. Otherwise, it won't make sense. Okay. I know that for myself that just my personal experience, if I feel like somebody hurts me, did something that they shouldn't have done, or I feel betrayed, or I feel like they weren't considerate and weren't considering my feelings when they did something, my overwhelming feeling is usually that of how wrong and bad that person is. How could they do that to me when I never did anything to them? And then I go to the superiority complex. Like, wow, I would never do that. And obviously they're wrong and I'm in the right. But if I actually really think about it, that's actually the second feeling I feel. My first response when somebody hurts me or I feel betrayed or I feel like something went wrong is actually usually of shame. I usually feel like, I somehow did something that allowed this to happen to me. I must be stupid to allow myself to have gotten in this situation or allowed this person to say this to me. But actually, neither of those matter. Both of those are me focusing on myself, either about how I like mask my shame and stuff with a superiority complex, and neither of those are healthy. Both of those are only about me. They both completely miss the mark. So maybe you can relate to some of those kind of feelings or emotions, or maybe you had something this week that came up and you're like, oh, that's what I can kind of relate to that. But it's the good news is that you're not alone. They're very human emotions, very human feelings to have. But there are also feelings and emotions that are not from God. In the divine principle, we use the term fallen nature to describe characteristics and tendencies that we humans have, and we all have them, but they are not from God. So we also do have characteristics and tendencies that are from God. That's the good news. We have what we call an original mind or an original nature when we rise above difficult situations, when we're ready to serve others, when we are thinking about the greater good when we do things. These are tendencies and nature from God. But we all have both. And our fallen nature is not from God. Our fallen nature stems originally from the archangel and the relationship that he had with the first humans. So I have I'm kind of guiding this message through some excerpts from the divine principle, because I find that divine principle really explores this in much more depth and clarity than I could find in any Bible verses. This is from the fall and divine principle. God created the angelic world and assigned Lucifer to the position of archangel. Lucifer was the channel of God's love to the angelic world. In this position, he virtually monopolized the love of God. However, after God created human beings as his children, he loved them many times more than he had ever loved Lucifer, whom he had created as his servant. In truth, God's love toward Lucifer did not change. He received so much love that he was then to bless humanity with, bless angels with. But, so his love towards Lucifer did not change. It was the same before and after the creation of human beings. Yet when Lucifer saw that God loved Adam and Eve more than him, he felt as if there had been a decrease in the love he received from God. If you were here last week, Pastor Mike actually shared this. It says here, the situation is similar to that in the biblical parable of the laborers in the vineyard. And we watched the video. Although the laborers who had worked since morning received a fair wage that they had agreed on, when they saw that those who came later and worked less received just as much, they felt underpaid. So this is kind of the setup for the fall, for the original first fallen natures that were experienced first by Lucifer and then multiplied to humanity. I'm going to go on here. So we talk about these four fallen natures. This kind of categorized broadly. Maybe there's some feelings or emotions that kind of overlap. But pretty much every negative experience, emotion, frustration kind of falls into these. But also something to know about them is that they build on each other. So you don't experience the last one without having gone through the first three. It's kind of like you begin in one place and then it takes you further. And if you don't correct a mindset or correct an action, it takes you further. And that's why it's so important to see from God's viewpoint. So, first one, the primary characteristics of the fallen nature can be divided broadly into four types. The first is failing to take God's standpoint. A principal cause of the archangel's fall was his failure to love Adam with the same heart and perspective as God. So, I think God's hope was that the archangel would feel the same kind of love and excitement and just can't wait to see what humanity does and kind of taking that heart as he was in a guiding and teaching position. Instead, he felt jealous of Adam, and this led him to tempt Eve. Make sure I don't miss something. Okay, so we talked a lot about that last week of not being able to take God's viewpoint on yourself and others. The second is leaving one's proper position. seeking more of God's love, Lucifer desired to enjoy the same position of love in the human world as he had in the angelic world. This unrighteous desire caused him to leave his position and fall. So God had created Lucifer to be like a guide, an educator, a teacher, a protector of Adam and Eve, leading them to understand all that God had invested into them, into the world, and helping them to, as they grew, to resemble God more. And then the way that this kind of displays in the world is that people are induced by unrighteous desire to step beyond the bounds of what is right and overreach themselves because of this primary characteristic of the fallen nature. So ways that you might see this in your life, hopefully not so much in your life, but it happens and in the world are, for example, maybe abusive parents. So rather than being the subject of love, the source of love in a family, being the person who guides the direction of the family and raising up children in God's love, that's the proper position of parents, right? So rather than doing that, there are parents who maybe demand love and obedience from their children before giving them love. Or another way to leave proper position is there are parents who, rather than giving guidance and proper discipline and keeping kids on the right track, try to be more like a friend to their kids. And, oh yeah, whatever you want. And let's make sure this is always fun for you. And you can eat whatever you want, even if you feel sick tomorrow, and even if you stay up too late because you had too much sugar. This is also a way that parents leave their proper position. There are actually so many people who are in positions of power. Some of them have earned it, and some of them have not. But there are many adults who are in positions of power over children and over other adults. And unfortunately, many of them do not know what a proper relationship and proper position should be. So they end up using and misusing and abusing their power. So I think you can probably think of some situations where you know people who have stepped beyond the bounds of what is right. That is leaving one's proper position, the second fallen nature. The third is reversing dominion. So in the first case, or the archangel, who was supposed to come under the dominion of human beings, right? As Adam and Eve grew in maturity, received God's love, resembled God, God intended for them to be like at the same level as God, co-creators. So the archangel was actually supposed to be under the dominion of them eventually. But instead, he dominated Eve. This disruption of the proper order has borne bitter fruit. Human society is thrown out of order by people who leave their proper position and then reverse the order of dominion. If I think of scenarios that I've seen or familiar with, we just mentioned about these parents who maybe leave the subject role of guiding, loving, disciplining their children. If we leave that, we inadvertently flip the roles, and often parents find themselves under the domination of their children. And by the way, children actually don't like that either. They're quite unhappy in that position without even really knowing why. And then the last one is multiplying the criminal act, or multiplying evil. So not just doing a thing, but then finding ways to spread it far and wide. The proclivity of evil people to entangle others in an expanding web of crimes stems from this primary characteristic of the fallen nature. So in the Bible, we saw that as not only did Lucifer not be able to see Adam and Eve from God's viewpoint, not only did he leave his position of a guide and teacher, but dominated Adam and Eve, who he was supposed to come under the dominion of. seduced Eve, and then Eve turned around and seduced Adam. Adam turns around and blames Eve and Lucifer, and then their children grew up to be people who commit murder. It's like, like that escalated quickly, right? So, but we find that that's the way that this goes. It's kind of a slippery slope where sometimes we get caught up in an negative emotion or feeling, and we're like kind of like stewing in that. And then because we're not seeing from God's viewpoint, we find ourselves relating to others in ways that we would not ideally or normally relate to them, which often results in some actions that we wish we hadn't done, which has repercussions that multiply and go far out. Maybe you've heard the term misery loves company. If we're in a negative mind space, unfortunately, we don't always keep that to ourselves, and we don't always find a healthy outlet for it. We often bring others into our negative spiral. This is also, gossip is a way of multiplying evil or multiplying negative things. Or another way that we often do this is if we're doing something that we kind of know we shouldn't be doing, we find somebody else to do it with us, because then we don't feel as bad about it. So unfortunately, there are some people who live their whole life inside this kind of negative spiral, negative cycle. They reside in feelings of anger and lack of love and wishing they had what other people had. And they're never in their proper position. And they never consider their or others' worth as God's children. Always acting out of emotions, and then multiplying these emotions and actions to those around him. There are so many people who this is like their reality. Yesterday we were out. We have several small animals. We have kind of a small petting zoo in our home. We've got a bunny and a couple of guinea pigs and a cat, and something we've been enjoying with the nice weather. And since the grass is green because of all the rain, we do like a grazing time. We take out the bunny and the guinea pigs to the front yard and put them in the grass, and it's just a really nice kind of family time. And we were all out yesterday evening doing this, and then we hear these tires squealing, and like you can smell the burned rubber, and there's this car careening around the corner, and then he does it again. He goes around this block like 4 times, and there are other cars driving who are like swerving off to the side of the road to not get hit. And I'm like, what is this person? Is just like, I thought maybe they were running from something, but then I realized they were just doing this for fun. And then they pulled over at the park, and they got out, and there was a little boy in the back, and they were doing this with a small child. So I was worried that they would like flip the car and hit the church or something. And I immediately went to the superiority complex. Like, oh my gosh, how could they? And of course, I would prefer that they get pulled over by the police and go to jail as better than the consequences of, running over somebody or killing themselves. But I realized that while there is action that needs to be fixed, I can't attach like a judgment and negative emotions to that, because that only perpetuates negativity. It only perpetuates the separateness between me and that person. Because when I started to think from God's viewpoint, I realized this person is somebody who must have grown up in this negative spiral where their parents were never in their proper position, where they didn't receive love and guidance and proper boundaries as children. The only way that this person could be so careless as to the small children and animals on the yard where he was driving, and all the people in the park and all the other people driving, is because they don't have any consideration for others. And the only reason you cannot have consideration for others is because somebody didn't care for you. So I just kind of had this glimpse of what this what world this person grew up in. And while I still wish that they had been caught, I have a lot of like pity, because how can I say that I would be different if I had been in their circumstances, right? Where is this? Yeah, who can say how I would act or how I would approach life or what my perspective on others would be if I hadn't received proper love and guidance from my parents, without constant encouragement and like being encouraged towards goodness and morality, always from my church community and like these camps like Camp Journey, right? We're always being encouraged towards goodness. So this also reminded me of a time, I think I shared about this a long time ago, but there was a little group of boys in our community. They were like 8 to 12 years old, really young boys, and they were mischief makers in this community. And once we even witnessed, I don't remember how, it was somebody else saw them or Mike saw them stealing one of my kids' bikes. But we'd see them often, and I actually ran into this boy in the park like a week later. I was with Annalise pushing her on the swing, and then this boy came up who was like 8 years old, and he's pushing a little girl on the swing. Apparently it was his cousin. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the one. This is the guy. And I had this little bit of a wrestle in myself, like I wanted to be like, hey, you're the one. Stole the bike. My kid I felt I was like particularly self-righteous because my kid didn't have any bikes, and he won this bike through like a neighborhood festival, had just gotten it like the week before and had ridden it once, and then it got stolen, and I was like, how could you? But again, I had this kind of perspective of like, what kind of world does this child live in where this is the only action for him to take, right? So I'm like trying to orient my perspective while I'm pushing Annalise here, and he's pushing his niece next to me, and I'm like, hey, I think you stole my kid's bike last week. And he had a couple of friends with him too. He's like, huh, what? No, I don't remember. And all kinds of profanities and stuff. And I'm like, I'm just curious, what you did with it or why you did it. And then, I didn't steal no bike. I mean, obviously he's the one who did it, and he wouldn't be reacting that way if he hadn't. And I was like, no, I'm just curious, and I'm not like mad at you really. I hope that you know that this is, you can choose better actions will lead you to better outcomes. This kind of thing. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I was just trying to like give a little bit of like, I don't hate you. I actually care about you. And again, he was like, and then his friend was like, dude, she's not going to call the police or anything. Chill out. And he was like, but it was actually such an interesting experience, because I feel like many times we don't actually confront the things that make us upset. Or we don't have the opportunity to see these people who have hurt us. And it was one of these times where it was just like, he's right in front of my face. And so what do I do with that? How can I inject a little bit of God's love into this situation or perspective that I hope leaves an imprint or maybe makes a difference somewhere in that kid's life, So, where am I? Okay, so there are many people who kind of live in this world. But maybe you're thinking, well, that's not me. I'm not this like super negative person. I don't live in this world. And it's true, but I do think that even as conscientious people who maybe don't always act on our negative feelings, it doesn't mean that we don't sometimes slip into them, or we don't sometimes take that first kind of step down a slippery slope. And maybe we catch ourselves and we don't allow ourselves to take negative actions or to multiply that evil. But there are still times when we kind of get wrapped up in this feeling of like, I'm envious of this other person's situation. Why can't mine situation be like that? Or we feel judgmental, or we feel like we aren't getting the love that we deserve. Right? That's something I think that we can all relate to. And being stuck in one of those feelings can ruin your whole day, can ruin a whole week. So I think that we fortunately recognize and know, right, that this being in that kind of emotional state can kind of lead us to things that we don't want to do, and so we try not to. But we do have to also learn how to get out of that first step, right, and go back to God's viewpoint. So the key to getting out of an emotional rut and avoiding actions we'll regret is to return to God's viewpoint. To see God's viewpoint on the situation, God's viewpoint on whoever we're struggling with, and God's viewpoint on myself. And that's why I asked Chelsea and the music ministry to sing Lauren Daigle's You Say song. I think it really points to how sometimes the only way that we can remove ourselves from feeling like we're not enough, or I'm just the sum of every high and every low, and I've done so many lows that I can never do enough good to get out of that. The only way is to return to God and God's promises of us, of knowing what God has said to us, and despite the fallen nature that all of us have and that all of us wrestle with, that all of us have inherited, we also all possess God's original nature. We all possess God's original mind. And sometimes we just need to remind ourselves that we are God's children and that I have the capacity to love others. I have the capacity to love everybody, even those who steal my kids' bikes, even those who drive dangerously on the residential streets and don't stop at stop signs. That's one of my pet peeves. When I'm walking to the community garden with my kids and somebody just goes right through a stop sign, I'm like, hey, there are kids walking here. I think that that's really the only thing that will change the world. Jonathan mentioned that Camp Journey it was like this moment of seeing what the world could be, a possibility of what relationships could look like. And it's only because the staff of that camp prepared themselves for a whole year to create an environment where they are committed to embracing each and every person who comes as a child of God and loving them with God's love. I know that every person at Camp Journey tasted, wow, this is God's love. But sometimes that means letting go of my self-righteousness. Sometimes that means letting go of my own indignation or my own superiority complex or my envy, and being able to see really what God's viewpoint is. Because even if we feel like we're in the right having those emotions, right, that will never actually bridge the gap between myself and the kid who stole my kid's bike, right? The only way where the world actually makes progress, where hearts are actually healed, is by people receiving God's true love. And I think we underestimate our ability to give that to people. So please join me in prayer. Heavenly Parent, thank you so much for a beautiful day. For all those who could be here, thank you so much for bringing back all of our young ones from Camp Journey safely and just filling them with your love and spirit. I wish I could have been there. I wish I could have had that reigniting experience of seeing what the kingdom of heaven looks like in real life, Heavenly Parent. But I just pray that we can always seek your viewpoint in our daily lives and in our families and through the people that we meet on the street, and especially through the difficult situations that arise and the things that really trigger our emotions and frustrations, that when we begin to feel this negative spiral of envy or resentment or frustration, that it can just be a reminder that that is not who we are. We maybe inherited that, but it is not me. Who I am is God's child, and my nature is God's nature. And I have the ability to bring you into everything that we do. Heavenly Parent, I pray we can bring that into our lives, our families, so that we don't have to wait a whole year for Camp Journey or some special experience to find your true love and to share it with others. We offer this time to you, and I pray this in my name, Michael and Adonia Hentrick, a blessed angel family. Amen and adieu. Okay, thank you.